What's up, Meatheads? Welcome back tonight for another Meathead Minute regarding one of my most favorite subjects, caffeine, and how it relates to one of my least favorite things, cardiovascular training, and specifically high-intensity interval training. This is important for all you functional fitness athletes out there. I know if you're anything like me, you like caffeinated pre-workout supplements. Now, we're not going to debate the problems and merits with those here completely, because obviously there's a lot of other ingredients, but we're going to talk about one specific study that I found very interesting after a buddy of mine showed it to me. This is from 2017, and it was done on rats. And these rats were put into two groups, both of them performing high-intensity interval training like exercise. Now, the type of exercise, rats compared to humans, we can discuss that at another point, but they were both simulated high-intensity interval training. One group was given 4 to 8 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine prior to workouts, and the other group was not. They were given a placebo. And just for comparison's sake, this may not be a completely accurate comparison, but 4 to 8 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine for someone my size, roughly 100 kilos, is going to be 400 to 800 milligrams, equaling anywhere between 2 and 4 energy drinks prior to a workout. So these rats, over the course of the measurement period, which the time has escaped me now, but I would believe it was 8 to 12 weeks, they were exposed to the same workouts, and at the end of this period, they had some measurements done. One of those was left ventricular hypertrophy, so that's thickness of the wall of the heart, which we often see as an adaptation in a lot of different types of cardiovascular training, and the response to the calcium channels in the calf, so how quickly those calf muscles could fire. And what's interesting was that when you dosed these rats with caffeine prior to their workouts, they had a significantly diminished response in both left ventricular hypertrophy and calf activation. Now, that sounds pretty powerful, especially for those of us that use high-intensity interval training in our workouts, specifically those like strongmen, CrossFitters, where there are those metabolic demands. We may be blunting our adaptations even though we're optimizing our performance in that individual workout. So that sounds a little bit scary, right? Well, not necessarily. This gives us kind of an opportunity to talk more about how to look into studies, and specifically this one, there were a few flaws that take away from its applicability to humans, but not necessarily from this being an area of interest moving forward. So one, the dose of caffeine. Now, there's probably a conversion factor with body surface area and other things involved, but a dose of 400 to 800 milligrams of caffeine for a 100 kilo person like myself, that's a ton of caffeine. That's definitely more than you need prior to a workout. I know a lot of you probably use about that for your workouts, but that's more than you need. So there's a possibility that this rapid increase in heart rate because of this extra caffeine may blunt some of the filling of the heart that leads to this left ventricular hypertrophy. So that high dose of caffeine, if the dose were lowered, would there have still been an adaptation? I think probably, but it's difficult to say without testing that hypothesis. 2, what were these simulated high-intensity interval training workouts comparatively in a rat's physiology to a human's? The weight component, so for example, in a CrossFit type workout, you have resistance training as part of this high-intensity interval training. Does that play a role? Furthermore, the most important thing I think is, does this change in calf activation and left ventricular hypertrophy actually change performance? Now, these lack of adaptations, so to speak, that are seen in the study, yes, they are physiologically there. You can see them on cross-section of the heart. You can see them when you measure the activity of the calcium channels in the calves. But does that equate to a decrease in performance if you don't have that adaptations, especially in a human subject? I think that's difficult to say. You know, we see a lot of things in physiology that we think should change performance, but they don't always do so. And lastly is what I think another really important part of this is transferring the study from rats to humans. Now, the percentage of fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers in the calves in rats and humans is going to be different. In addition to that, the overall function of the heart is going to be different. So this does give us a really interesting thing to look at moving forward, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this study is the end-all be-all saying, oh my God, stop taking caffeine prior to interval training or cardiovascular training or training to begin with. So it does raise the question of adaptation versus optimization. In a high performance setting like a meet, maybe you do want to have your caffeine. In a lower performance setting like training, maybe you don't want to have it. In fact, there's a lot of athletes that do that will taper off their caffeine intake leading up to a competition so they can get a bigger bump on competition day. That's a discussion for another time, but playing with performance in the gym versus performance on the competition field is definitely something to look at when it comes to caffeine intake specifically. And other supplements involved can definitely cloud the picture. That kind of covers that study. I know a lot of scientific terminology being thrown out there, and some of you may not think that this is applicable, but these are where these human studies start. They start in animals, and as we move them up the chain, they go to human subjects, and that's how we get large-scale training and physiology studies. So this is a good place to start. If you have any questions about the study or want to talk a little bit more, feel free to leave something in the comments. I think it's going to be an interesting area of research moving forward, especially as we find the dose-dependent effects of caffeine change in certain types of activity. All right, that's it for tonight, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.